So this lecture is about understanding the difference between keys, extremes, breakdowns, and in-betweens. The illustrations here are taken from the Animator's Survival Kit, and do have a look there if you want a more detailed summary of what this is about. But essentially, what we're talking about here is a language of animation, and it's very important that you understand this because during the course you're going to hear me referring all the time to your keys, your extremes, your breakdowns, and your in-betweens, and it's important that you understand what the difference is between them. Now here's a kind of hierarchy, which is a way of thinking about this. With keys at the top, those are your most important poses, your most important drawings, if it were 2D, poses in 3D. Then your extremes, slightly less important than the keys, the breakdowns, slightly less important than the extremes, and finally the in-betweens at the bottom, which are the least important of all. So it's basically a kind of pyramid. Keys at the top, extremes next, breakdowns almost at the bottom, and in-betweens the most minor part of what we do, and that's really what we allow Maya to give to us for free. Now, what is the difference? So, your keys are really your storytelling drawings. They really are the poses without which you cannot tell the story of the shot. So if you watch the storyboards on a movie, quite often those storyboards can be used as your key animation positions. And I've worked on a number of projects where the storyboard artist did such a good job with their storyboard drawings that I was able to take those storyboard drawings and use them as my key poses. Now that isn't always the case. Sometimes the quality of the storyboards will vary. Sometimes there aren't enough to use them as your keys. But if the storyboard artist is really doing their job beautifully and well, then you can use those poses as your key poses in your animation. The extremes are the slightly less important drawings, but still important. Those are really your changes of direction. The breakdowns are how you get from one extreme to another, and finally the in-betweens are where we hit spline in the graph editor at the end of the shot, and we let Maya do all our in-betweens for us. Of course, in the old days of 2D animation, the in-betweener was actually an entry-level job, and it was how we all got started in the business. Companies needed in-betweeners. Somebody had to do all those in-between positions by hand, and that was me. That was my that was my first job on Who Framed Roger Rabbit. That's what I did. I did the somewhat mindless job of inserting in-between positions in between the breakdown drawings, which were done by the assistant animators. So typically the animator would do the key poses and also the extremes, and then the assistants would do all the breakdown poses, and then the in-betweener would do the in-betweens. Nowadays, we don't really have assistant animators anymore because Maya does it all for us, and we certainly don't need in-betweeners because Maya is definitely going to do that for us. So nowadays the animator tackles everything with assistance from Maya. Okay, so let's take an example to make this all a bit more clear. And I'm going to take the example from the Animator's Survival Kit. That's a man walking over to a piece of chalk which is on the floor. He picks up the chalk and he starts to write on a blackboard. So what I'd like you to do is actually act that out before you go any further. Just stand at one end of the room that you're in, throw a pencil or a piece of chalk or anything you've got to hand into the middle of the into the middle of the floor, walk over to it, pick it up, and start writing on the board. And I want you to ask yourself, what are the key positions in this little scene that we've imagined? In other words, what are the poses without which you cannot tell this story? Let's say you were going to storyboard this for a movie. How many poses would you need? And I think the answer is, well, I'm just going to assume you're going to pause here and go off and do this. And then the answer is that I think you really need 3 poses. You've got your start pose, your kind of key pose as the man walks up to the piece of chalk, then another key pose as the man picks up the piece of chalk or contacts the piece of chalk, and then another pose as he starts to write on the board. So you've got to have your 3 key positions. These are your storytelling drawings. You cannot tell this story of the man walking over to the piece of chalk and drawing on the board without these 3 positions. Now what about your extremes? Or actually, before we talk about extremes, let's just talk briefly about timing. This isn't really a timing video, but it's helpful just to introduce the concept of timing here. And the question, how long does the shot take, ultimately is a question of timing. And you can use a stopwatch, I'm sure you've got one on your phone, to time it out. But you can also do what I do when I'm timing out animation, and I just go 1 1000, 2 1000, 3 1000, 4 1000 in my head like that. And that helps me time out the number of seconds that it's going to take to finish the shot. So if we approach this scene from the beginning and go 1 1000, 2 1000, 3 1000, 4 1000, 5 1000, 6 1000, the shot's probably going to take us around about 6 to 8 seconds. It'll be less time if we hurry, of course, but if we're taking it at a leisurely pace, something like 6 to 8 seconds, that means it's going to be between 150 and 200 frames long, roughly. Okay, so now let's talk about the extremes. Extremes are essentially a change of direction. And here we've got our original keys here in black, but the extremes are the number of changes of direction. So that's the number of steps that it's going to take to get our man to the next, from one key pose to another. So we're going to have quite a few extremes here, but they are not nearly as important as the breakdown positions, which will come next. And if you were showing your work to a director, you would probably want to show a pose test with all of your keys and all of your extremes on it. Because the director probably won't, if you just showed a pose test using these 1, 2, 3 key positions, that's probably not really enough. But if you show the director a pose test with the 3 positions plus the extremes, then you're really blocking out the main action of the shot. So you can usually block out a shot using keys and extremes only, and then leaving the breakdowns until later. And that's normally the point at which I would show my work to a director, is having done the keys and the extreme positions. Assuming the director likes my work, I'm now going to start to put in breakdown positions. And that's really how you get, the breakdown is how you get from one extreme to another. So here the breakdowns are in blue, and our character's going up on this breakdown, and then we don't have the squash positions yet, but we might insert those too if we really wanted to be accurate with this. It probably should have the squash or down positions as well as the passing positions. But now you can see we've got an awful lot of information here, and that's why it's so important to show your work to a director when you're just doing keys and extremes, because once you're starting throwing in breakdowns, you know, it's quite difficult to go back now, because we've put a lot of work into this now. We don't want to be making a whole lot of changes to our work, and if the director doesn't like what we've done, then we will have to make changes to our work. So breakdowns, really you start inserting those once the director or whoever it is likes what you're doing. Finally, the in-betweens, that's really everything else. And that's when we let Maya do the work for us. We spline our curves and we let Maya do all of the in-betweens for us. And of course we can adjust our in-betweens manually, but Maya will give us free in-betweens, unlike in the old days when people like me had to do them. So actually the loss of the in-betweener as a job in animation has been a great boon to the animation industry, but it's also a bit of a handicap for animators, because that was how you got your first job. And that was how we first got that was how we all got our first job in the business, was by starting as animators. Nowadays you can't do that, and those entry-level jobs have gone. You really need to be fully formed as an animator when you start working. So back to the hierarchy. Think of it as a pyramid with keys at the top of the pyramid. Extremes are changes of direction slightly below them. Breakdowns, how you get from one extreme to another, and then in-betweens at the bottom, the brainless, mindless in-betweens, which we can let Maya give us for free. So that's a general introduction to the concept of keys, extremes, breakdowns, and in-betweens. And you'll be hearing a lot of these over the next few months. So it's well to have a good understanding of what they are.